6 patients, 1 nurse, and a director who laughed. That was the moment Dr. Marcus Holt decided to humiliate the quietest woman in the emergency department, dumping every critical trauma case onto a single nurse's shoulders and walking away with a smirk. He expected her to collapse, to beg, to prove he was right about her all along. What he got instead stopped every doctor in that hallway cold, because the woman he just handed 6 dying people to wasn't shaking. She was already moving, and her hands knew exactly what to do, because they had done it before. In places most of these doctors had never heard of. Before we go any further, if stories like this hit different for you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go. The storm rolled into Mercer Falls, Wyoming 3 hours before the first ambulance arrived. It came in low and sideways, the kind of weather that didn't announce itself with thunder, just a steady drop in pressure that made your ears pop and your joints ache. And then suddenly, every window in the building was rattling and the emergency radio on the nurse's station was spitting static between dispatches. Outside, the mountains had disappeared entirely behind a wall of gray. Lena Marsh noticed it first. She was standing at the medication cart on the east corridor when the sky outside the window went the color of old iron, and she thought quietly that tonight was going to be one of those nights. She was 31 years old, 5'6". Brown hair pulled back with one of those plain elastic bands they sold 3 for $1 at the pharmacy across the street. She had worked the emergency department at Callaway Memorial Hospital for 2 years, always the early shift, always the quiet one, always the nurse who showed up 8 minutes before her scheduled start and never once complained when she got handed the hardest caseload on the floor. People noticed her the same way they noticed a wall, aware of it, dependent on it, but not really thinking about it unless something went wrong. Dr. Marcus Holt had never once called her by her first name. To him, she was Nurse Marsh. Emphasis on the nurse, said the way you might say janitor when you were feeling especially tired of the world. He was 53, department director for 11 years, the kind of man who wore his authority like a second coat, always on, always visible, uncomfortable for everyone else in the room. He had built the ER at Callaway Memorial in his own image, which meant it ran on hierarchy, and hierarchy meant that people like Lena Marsh stood at the bottom of it and were grateful for the privilege. She had learned not to argue with that, not because she agreed with it, but because arguing costs time, and time was the one thing she never had enough of. The first ambulance came in at 6:47 p.m. A 40-year-old construction foreman named Dale Pruitt, crush injury to the left leg, blood pressure dropping, already gray in the face by the time the paramedics rolled him through the bay doors. The wind came in with him, a hard, cold gust that knocked a clipboard off the nurse's station and sent it skidding across the floor. Lena was at his side before the gurney stopped moving. She checked his pupils, pressed 2 fingers to his neck, scanned the paramedic's handwritten notes in the same motion, all of it fluid and practiced in a way that looked like instinct because it was. "What's his pressure?" she asked without looking up. 80/50 when we loaded him, 60/40 now, the paramedic said. He was young. His hands were still shaking from the drive. Okay, she was already moving. "Get me a large bore IV, 2 lines, left arm. Hang a liter of saline wide open." "That's a physician order. I'm telling you what he needs right now. Get the IV in, and I'll have a doctor here in 40 seconds. Go." He went. She turned to flag down the nearest resident and nearly walked into Dr. Marcus Holt, who had materialized at the edge of the trauma bay with his arms crossed and the particular expression he wore when he was about to make someone's evening worse. "Nurse Marsh," he said it the way you'd say, "Oh, you're still here. Did I just hear you issuing medication orders?" "I told a paramedic to establish IV access on a trauma patient with a pressure of 60/40, she said. "I'm getting Dr. Vasquez. Dr. Vasquez is in surgery." He let that land. "As is Dr. Kimura. And Dr. Tran has a family emergency, so he's gone for the night." Lena looked at him. "Who's covering the floor?" "Dr. Aronson. He's managing a respiratory arrest in Bay 2. Holt glanced at his watch with the leisurely energy of a man who had never once run from anything. Which means the floor is currently... The radio crackled. Dispatch. Urgent. Second ambulance incoming. 2 patients, MVA, 1 pediatric. Holt's mouth curved at one corner. Busy, he finished. He walked away. That was the moment Lena understood what was happening. Not all at once. She was too busy for that. But in the way you understand a car accident before it's finished, that terrible slowing of time when you can see exactly how the pieces are going to hit each other, and there is nothing you can do but brace. Marcus Holt wasn't stretched thin tonight. He was choosing this. Choosing to leave her alone out here while the ambulances stacked up and the storm knocked the power grid sideways, and the nearest backup hospital was 40 minutes away on a good road, which tonight was not. She had 2 seconds to be angry about it. Then Dale Pruitt's monitor alarmed, and she went back to work. The second ambulance brought the MVA, a 47-year-old woman named Sandra Kowalski with a head laceration that needed pressure and a possible spinal compromise, and her 8-year-old son Tyler, who was conscious and terrified, and had a compound fracture of the right radius that had broken clean through the skin. The boy was not crying. That bothered Lena more than if he had been. She got them into adjacent bays, assessed both in under 4 minutes, and was calling out to the charge nurse, a heavy-set man named Ray Obradovich, who had the specific look of someone deeply regretting his career choices. When the third ambulance rolled in, then the fourth. By the time the fifth and sixth arrived, a 68-year-old man named Harlan Quill with chest pain that had STEMI written all over his face, and a 35-year-old woman 9 months pregnant and in early labor with a suspected placental abruption. The emergency bay was a controlled riot. Every doctor on the floor was occupied. Every trauma bay was full. The storm had taken out one of the backup generators, which meant half the overhead lights were running on auxiliary power, and the temperature in the bay had dropped 4 degrees in 20 minutes. Lena stood in the center of it and did the thing she had trained herself never to do in front of these people. She took 1 full breath, eyes closed, counting. 1, 2, 3. She opened her eyes. "Ray?" she said. Her voice came out flat and even. "I need you on bay 6 with the OB patient. She's 39 weeks, contractions every 3 minutes, and she's bleeding. Keep 2 large-bore IVs in and monitor fetal heart tones. Call labor and delivery, tell them we need a crash C-section team on standby, and if anyone tries to tell you they can't come down here tonight, you put me on the phone." Ray stared at her. "Lena, I know what you are," she said. "I also know what that woman needs, and she needs someone standing next to her right now more than she needs someone who knows every protocol by heart. You can do this. Go." He went. She turned to the 2 nursing students who had been frozen at the edge of the bay since the third ambulance, both of them looking like they were reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. "You," she said to the taller one, a young woman whose badge read Priya K. "Bay 1, the crush injury. His pressure is in the basement. Your only job is to watch those numbers and yell at me if anything drops below 60 systolic. You don't touch anything else. You watch and you yell. Understood?" Priya nodded, quick and serious. She moved. "You." The other student, a young man, lanky, pale, she didn't catch the name on his badge. "Bay 4, the headlack. Keep steady pressure on that wound. Don't let up. If she loses consciousness or her pupils go unequal, you scream for me. Go." He went. That left Lena with 4 remaining patients and no physician and a power grid that was having an argument with itself. She started with Harlan Quill because Harlan Quill was going to die first. He was the color of old wax when she got to him, sitting up on the gurney with one hand pressed to his sternum like he was trying to hold something in. His wife was there, a small woman in a rain-soaked jacket who kept saying, "He said it wasn't serious. He said it was probably nothing," in the way people say things when they're trying to convince themselves. "Not you." "Harlan," Lena said, pulling the leads from the crash cart. "I need you to lie back for me." "It's my heart," he said. Not a question. "Let's find out." She got the leads on in under 90 seconds, printed the strip, looked at it. 12 lead told her everything she needed to know in the way a bad X-ray tells you. You don't have to be a specialist to understand this is wrong. ST elevation in 2, 3, and a VF. Inferior wall. She flagged the strip and called the cardiac cath lab on the extension while simultaneously drawing blood, troponin, BMP, CBC, and hanging nitroglycerin, and doing all of it with the specific economy of motion she'd learned in a different life, in a different context, where doing 3 things wrong in sequence wasn't a malpractice issue, but a body count. The cath lab picked up on the 3rd ring. This is Nurse Marsh from the ER. I have a STEMI, inferior wall, on set approximately 90 minutes ago. I need a team activated now. We'll need physician authorization. Dr. Aronson is managing a respiratory arrest. I'll get you authorization the second he's out. I need the team moving. She paused. If you wait for paperwork, this man doesn't make it to the paperwork. Your call. A beat of silence. Team is moving, the cath lab tech said. She hung up. Marcus Holt appeared at the edge of Bay 3. He had his arms crossed again. He had a cup of coffee. He was watching her with the particular expression of a man who had already decided how this story ended and was simply waiting for it to catch up. You called the cath lab, he said. I did. Without a physician order. She looked up from the IV line she was running. With a physician who is 7 feet away managing a code, I'll get the order. Protocol says the patient gets treatment, she said. That's the whole point of the protocol, Dr. Holt. She moved to the next bay. She heard him say, behind her, to someone she couldn't see, this is exactly the kind of independent action that creates liability. I want it documented. The pregnant woman, her name was Cora Lennox, she'd told Lena twice already as if anchoring herself to something real, was lying on her left side with Ray standing next to her looking like a man holding a live wire and trying very hard not to show it. How are we doing? Lena asked. Heart rate's good, Ray said. 102. Contractions are every 90 seconds now. Cora grabbed Lena's wrist. Her grip was stronger than Lena expected. Something's wrong, she said. I can feel it. Something is wrong with the baby. Lena checked the fetal monitor. The baby's heart rate was dipping with each contraction. Not catastrophically, not yet, but the pattern had a name and the name was not good. I see it, Lena said, and she meant it as both acknowledgement and reassurance, which was a combination she'd had to learn to deliver in about half a second. We're getting you to where you need to be. The team is coming down. It's not going to be in time, Cora said. Her voice was completely level. She had the eyes of someone who had already run the numbers. Is it? Lena met her gaze. Let me do my job, she said, and you do yours, which is breathe and keep squeezing that rail and do not let go. Cora let go of Lena's wrist. She grabbed the bed rail instead. Good enough. Lena moved to the boy next, Tyler, the 8-year-old with the broken arm, and found him still not crying, which remained the most alarming thing in the room. He was sitting with his arm in a makeshift splint that the paramedics had rigged, and he was watching everything happening around him with the wide, careful eyes of a child who had learned that being very still and very quiet was sometimes the only safe option available. Hey, she said. She sat down, which nobody in this room had done in the last 40 minutes. She sat down next to him at his level and waited until he looked at her. What's your name? Tyler, he said. Tyler, your arm hurts a lot, doesn't it? He nodded once. I'm going to fix that, she said. Not in the next 30 seconds because I have to go help some other people first. But I promise you it's on my list and you are not forgotten, okay? He nodded again, then quietly. Is my mom okay? Your mom is getting taken care of right now. She's tough. She stood up. Like you. She was halfway out of the bay when she heard him say, barely audible, okay. She kept moving. The 6th patient, the one in Bay 2 who had originally been Aronson's respiratory arrest, was now stable enough that Aronson had stepped out, and Lena caught him in the corridor and had the physician order for the cath lab signed before he fully processed what she was asking for. He read the strip she'd printed. His expression changed. Who ran this? I did. He looked at her for a moment. It's a clean read, he said. Then, cath lab is mobilized? Waiting on you. He was already reaching for the phone. Marcus Holt was back. He had positioned himself in the center of the ER, the way an obstacle positions itself, squarely, immovably, watching. "Dr. Aronson," he said, stepping in as the other physician passed, "I need to discuss the independent actions taken by Nurse Marsh this evening." "In a minute, Marcus." Aronson kept walking. "I've got a STEMI going to the cath lab." Holt turned back to Lena. She was at the medication dispensing cabinet, pulling morphine for Tyler's fracture pain, moving through the authorization process with the specific speed of someone who knew exactly where every button was. "Nurse Marsh," he said. "Stop." She didn't stop. "I said stop." She turned. She looked at him with the exact neutral expression of a person who has practiced the art of not giving someone the reaction they want. "Dr. Holt," she said, "I have 6 patients. One of them is 9 months pregnant with a pattern on her monitor that concerns me. One of them is having a heart attack. One of them is an 8-year-old in pain. I'm going to keep moving, and if you have something to say to me, I invite you to say it while walking." She turned back to the cabinet. Behind her, she heard him say very quietly to someone, "She just ended her career. Make sure the cameras are running." The words landed somewhere in her chest. Not because they hurt. She'd had worse said to her in worse places, but because they reminded her what was actually happening here. This wasn't a bad night. This was engineered. Holt had looked at the staffing board, looked at the incoming weather, looked at who was left standing, and decided tonight was the night to make his point. She had 6 patients, no backup, and a man with institutional authority who was actively rooting for her to fail. She pulled the morphine. She signed the log. She went back to Tyler. The overhead lights flickered. Not unusual. The backup generator had been running on reduced capacity since the storm took out the east substation, and the hospital's electrical system had been complaining about it in small, rhythmic ways for the last hour. Flickering. Dim patches in the corridor. The specific hum of overloaded circuits. Lena registered it the way she registered everything tonight. Filed it. Calculated the implications. Kept moving. She was splinting Tyler's arm, properly this time, the way it needed to be, patting the wound, setting the temporary stabilizer. When she heard the sound. Not an alarm. Something before an alarm. The cessation of background noise that you don't notice until it stops. The hum of the HVAC. The low vibration of the backup generator. The ambient mechanical breathing of a building that never goes fully quiet. All of it stopped. Then the lights went out. Not the flickering, uncertain dark of a partial outage. Complete. Immediate. The emergency bays went black for 2 full seconds before the secondary backup, the hospital's last resort battery system, kicked the emergency lighting on, red-tinged and dim, enough to see. Not enough to do much else with. Every monitor in the emergency department alarmed simultaneously. Somewhere above them, upstairs in the main surgical wing, a door crashed open, and then voices, multiple voices, the specific panic cadence of people who have just realized something has gone very wrong. Lena kept her hands on Tyler's arm. "Eyes on me," she said to the boy. "Don't look at the lights. Look at me." He looked at her. "Good," she said. "We're going to be okay." She finished the splint. She stood up. The elevator at the end of the corridor made a sound like a grinding complaint and went silent. She looked at the indicator panel above the elevator doors. The numbers had frozen. 3 of the hospital's 4 trauma surgeons were somewhere above the 5th floor. The cardiac team was in the cath lab on the 3rd floor. The stairs were accessible. But in a building this size, in a power failure this complete, with patients on gurneys and equipment that needed electrical outlets, Ray Obradovich appeared at her elbow. He was breathing fast. "Lena, the OB team says they can't get the elevator." "I know." "What do we do?" She looked at the 6 bays, 6 patients, 2 nursing students, 1 overwhelmed charge nurse, 1 doctor who had just called the cath lab and was now dealing with a phone that had lost half its connections, and a director who was still standing in the center of the department with his arms crossed, in the dark, waiting for her to fold. "We manage," she said. It was not the answer Ray wanted. It was the only answer she had. She moved toward Bay 6, toward Cora Lennox, because the fetal monitor had been one of the machines that alarmed when the power dropped. And right now, that was the most important piece of information in the room. Outside, through the bay doors that someone had propped open to let in the last of the evening air, the storm had gotten worse. The wind was doing something to the building, not dangerous, but audible, a low, steady pressure against the walls that made the whole structure feel like it was breathing. Inside, in the red emergency light, 6 patients waited, and Lena Marsh walked toward the hardest of them, her footsteps quiet and even on the tile, the same way she had walked toward hard things before, in other rooms, under other lights, in other kinds of dark. She rolled her sleeves up. She was not done. The fetal monitor was running on battery backup, which gave it maybe 40 minutes before it died completely, and the number on the screen when Lena got to bay 6 made her stomach drop 2 inches before she controlled it. 91 beats per minute, baby's heart rate. It should have been between 110 and 160. 91 was the number you saw right before you started making very fast decisions. Cora Lennox was watching her face. "Tell me," Cora said, "the baby's heart rate is lower than I want it." Lena was already repositioning the external monitor, checking the lead placement, because sometimes it was the leads and not the baby. "I'm going to roll you to your other side." "That bad?" "Roll first, talk after." She helped Cora shift, and Cora moved with more strength than most people gave her credit for, rolling onto her right side with her jaw set and her hand wrapped around the bed rail so hard her knuckles were white. The number climbed. 102. 108. Lena exhaled through her nose. "Better," she said. "That's better." "How much better?" "Enough for right now." Ray was hovering at the edge of the bay. He'd been hovering since the lights went out, which she understood. Ray was a good charge nurse and a decent human being, and he was completely out of his depth, and being out of your depth in the dark was its own particular kind of terrifying. "The OB resident," Lena said to him, without looking up from the monitor. "Where is she?" "Still on 4. The stairwell door on 4 is jammed. Maintenance is working on it." "How long?" "They said 15 minutes. She ran the math. Contractions every 80 seconds. Heart rate recovering, but still low. 15 minutes might be 15 minutes too many." "Get me the portable ultrasound," she said, "and the delivery kit from the supply closet, the red one on the second shelf." Ray went still. "Lena." "The red kit, Ray. Now." He went. She didn't let herself think about what it meant that she'd just asked for the delivery kit. She filed it in the same mental drawer where she kept everything she couldn't afford to feel yet, and she focused on Cora, on the monitor, on the numbers. "You've done this before," Cora said. She wasn't asking. She was a woman who taught high school chemistry. She'd mentioned that when they first brought her in. And she had the particular habit of making observations instead of asking questions. "Not just nursing." "I've seen complicated deliveries," Lena said carefully. "That's not what I mean." Lena met her eyes. Cora had dark circles under both of them, and her hair was matted from the rain, and she looked exactly like a person who had been driving home from a prenatal appointment when a drunk driver ran a red light, which was exactly what she was. She also looked completely clear-headed. "Let's focus on you," Lena said. "I am focused," Cora said. "I'm focused on the fact that the woman taking care of me moves like someone who's done this in a tent." Lena didn't answer that. She checked the IV lines instead. Both running, both good. And she was recalculating fluid rates when she heard Marcus Holt's voice from the corridor. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to someone on a phone. One of the few lines still working, a landline routed through the hospital's independent system. She caught fragments. Protocol violation, unauthorized orders, liability exposure. His voice was calm and methodical, the voice of a man building a case brick by brick in the middle of a disaster. Priya appeared at the bay entrance. She'd been on Dale Pruitt in Bay 1, and her expression told Lena something before her mouth did. "His pressure dropped again," Priya said. 72 systolic. Lena was moving before Priya finished the sentence. Dale Pruitt was the color of old concrete, and he'd gone somewhere behind his eyes. Not unconscious, but the specific detachment of a body that was quietly negotiating with itself about whether to keep going. His crush injury had been bleeding internally since before the ambulance loaded him, and they'd been fighting it with fluid and pressure and the particular hope you maintain when the alternative is uselessness. The hope was losing. She checked his abdomen. Distended. more than before. The internal bleeding wasn't slowing, it was accelerating, and without a surgeon, and without an OR, and without power to run the imaging equipment at full capacity, she was working with her hands and her eyes and a mental picture of what his insides were probably doing right now. "Dale," she said sharply, "stay with me." His eyes moved to her, slow, but they moved. "I need you here," she said. "I know it's easier not to be. Stay anyway." He blinked. Something in his face tightened. Not much, but enough. "Cold," he said. "I know. We're going to warm you up." She turned to Priya. "Warm saline, second bag, run it wide open. Get me the pressure cuffs for both lines and pump them manually, so I want that fluid in him fast. And blankets, heated if the warmer is still running, regular if it's not. The warmer's on auxiliary. Then regular blankets, 3 of them. Go." Priya went. She was good. Better than she gave herself credit for. She had the particular quality of someone who was scared but refused to let the fear win, which in Lena's experience was more useful than someone who wasn't scared at all. Dr. Aronson appeared at her elbow. He'd finished with the respiratory arrest, and he looked like a man who had been awake for too long making too many decisions, which was accurate. "Talk to me," he said. "Bay 1 is internal bleeding, crush mechanism, pressure dropping despite resuscitation. He needs surgery. ORs are on 4 and 5. Elevators. Stairwell is jammed on 4, I know." She paused. "Is there any way to get a surgical team down here?" Aronson ran a hand through his hair. "I'm working on it. The stairwell on the west side might be clear. I've got 2 residents trying right now." He looked at Dale Pruitt. "How long does he have?" She looked at Dale, too. He wasn't going to like the honest answer, but Aronson wasn't asking because he wanted comfort. 20 minutes at current trajectory, maybe 30 if we can maintain pressure." Aronson nodded once. He didn't say anything. He turned and walked toward the west corridor with the specific speed of someone who has stopped thinking about options and started thinking about action. She went back to Cora. The portable ultrasound had arrived. Ray had found it and wheeled it in without being asked twice, which was progress. And she ran the probe across Cora's abdomen with hands that she would not allow to shake. The image came up grainy and incomplete on the battery-powered screen. Enough. Placenta was intact. Barely. There was a separation at the margin, a crescent of dark space between the placental edge and the uterine wall that had no business being there. Not catastrophic yet. Getting there. The baby's heart rate on the monitor read 114. Better. Still lower than she wanted, but better. "You're doing well," she told Cora. "You're lying," Cora said, "but I appreciate it." "I'm not lying. You're doing well. The situation is harder. That's not the same thing." Cora was quiet for a moment. Then, "My husband is in the parking lot. They won't let him in because of the lockdown." "I know. We'll get him to you." "He's going to be freaking out." "Probably," Lena said. "That's what people who love you do." She got Ray to call down to security to escort Cora's husband up through the west stairwell if it cleared, and she moved back to Tyler. The boy had fallen asleep. She didn't know if this was a victory or a new problem, and she stood at the edge of his bay for about 4 seconds doing a rapid assessment. Respiratory rate normal, color okay, arm splinted and still, the specific boneless quality of a child who has finally exhausted himself past the point of being afraid. She decided it was a victory. Let him sleep. Pain management was working. She'd check him again in 12 minutes. She checked her watch, 6 minutes since the power went out. It felt like 40. Marcus Holt was walking through the bays now, not helping, observing. He moved through the emergency department like an inspector touring a facility he'd already decided to condemn, stopping at each bay long enough to make notes on the yellow legal pad he'd produced from somewhere. He hadn't spoken directly to her since she'd told him to follow or get out of the way. He was doing neither. He was building something quietly in the background, while the emergency she was managing played out in the foreground. She had been aware of people like him before, in different contexts. The ones who weaponized process while the actual work was happening around them. She filed him in the drawer with everything else she couldn't afford to feel yet. Harlan Quill's wife stopped her in the corridor. Her name was Beverly. She was 64, and she had the eyes of someone who had been holding herself together by force of will since they arrived. And now the force of will was starting to cost more than she had. "Is he going to make it?" Beverly asked. "Just that. Plain." Lena stopped. This was the question you got at least once per shift, and there was a version of this conversation that was professional and measured and kept appropriate distance, and she knew how to have that conversation. She also knew that Beverly Quill had been married to that man for probably 35 years, and she deserved better than appropriate distance. The cath lab team was mobilized before the power went out, Lena said. They have independent power. Dr. Aronson has authorized the procedure. Your husband is going to get exactly what he needs. She paused. I don't make promises I can't keep. What I can tell you is that everything that can be done is being done, and it's being done by people who are good at it. Beverly Quill looked at her for a long moment. You're not like the other nurses here, she said finally. Lena had nothing to say to that, so she said nothing. The way you talk, Beverly said. The way you move around in there. It's like you've seen worse. I need to get back, Lena said gently. Right, Beverly said. Right, of course. She stepped aside. Lena moved back into the bay. She was rechecking the IV lines on the pregnant woman when the west stairwell door banged open and Dr. Aronson came through with two other people. A man in scrubs she recognized as one of the third-floor surgical residents, and a woman she didn't recognize at all, in scrubs as well, with the particular economical movement of someone who operated in high-pressure environments and had learned not to waste energy on anything that didn't need it. This is Dr. Paula Reyes, Aronson said, slightly out of breath from the stairs. She was visiting from Denver General. She was on 5 when the elevator went down. She's a trauma surgeon. Lena looked at Paula Reyes. Paula Reyes looked back with flat, assessing eyes that moved from Lena's face to the 6 bays and back to Lena's face. Which one first? Reyes asked. Bay 1, Lena said. Internal bleeding, crush injury, 20 minutes maybe. He needs you more than anyone else in this room. Reyes moved past her without another word. That was the right response. The surgical resident, his badge said Horton, was already pulling gloves from the dispenser. Bay 6, Lena told him. Obstetric complication. I'll walk you through what I've got. She gave him the full handoff in 90 seconds, which was approximately how long it took to walk to Bay 6. Placental margin, fetal heart rate, gestational age, medication profile, current vital signs. Horton was a second-year resident, and he had the specific look of someone absorbing information faster than was comfortable. But he was absorbing it, and he asked 2 sharp questions that told her he'd understood it. She left him with Cora and went to find Dr. Aronson. He was at the nurse's station, working the phone with the focused intensity of someone trying to hold a system together from the inside out. I need to tell you something, she said. He put the phone against his shoulder. Go. The patient in Bay 1, Dale Pruitt, his abdomen was significantly distended when I assessed him 30 minutes ago. Dr. Reyes needs that information. I'll relay it. Also the STEMI in Bay 5, Harlan Quill. His wife is in the corridor. Someone needs to update her. I'll get someone. She needs it now, Lena said. Not when we get around to it. Aronson looked at her, not with annoyance, with something else. A recalibration, small and involuntary, like a man who had been looking at something one way and had just understood he'd been slightly wrong. I'll go myself, he said. She nodded. She turned away. Marcus Holt stepped directly into her path. He had his legal pad. His coffee was gone. He must have set it down somewhere. And without it, he looked slightly less composed, as if the cup had been doing some structural work. Nurse Marsh, he said, I've been documenting, I know you have, a series of unauthorized actions taken by you this evening that I believe constitute a significant breach of Dr. Holt. She didn't raise her voice. She made it quieter, actually, because she had learned that quiet was more unsettling than volume in most situations. I have a trauma surgeon operating in Bay 1, an obstetric resident managing a complication in Bay 6, a cardiac team running a procedure upstairs, and a child in Bay 4 whose pain is finally controlled. All of that happened because I kept moving while the physicians were unavailable. That's not how this hospital I know how this hospital works, she said. I've been here 2 years. I've seen how it works. Something moved across his face, irritation, and under it, not fear exactly, but the particular discomfort of a man who has set something in motion and is beginning to question the timeline. You're going to be reviewed, he said. "Every decision made tonight is going to be reviewed." "Good," she said. "I hope they look at everything." She stepped around him. She got back to Tyler in Bay 4. The boy was still asleep, which was still good, and she was doing a quiet check of his vitals when she heard something that stopped her hand mid-air. Not an alarm, something more specific. From Bay 1, Dale Pruitt's bay. A sharp exchange of voices. Not panicked, but fast and technical. The verbal shorthand of two people managing something that had gotten complicated. She heard Dr. Reyes say pressure, and then a number that was too low, and she heard the resident say something about a second line, and then there was a sound she recognized. The flat mechanical percussion of hands on a chest. She moved. She was in Bay 1 before she consciously decided to go. Dale Pruitt was flat on the gurney, eyes closed. The monitor above him showing a rhythm that was technically present, but doing something it shouldn't. Reyes was at his side with her hands already occupied. The resident was drawing up something from a vial. "He converted," Reyes said without looking up. "VTAC, 20 seconds ago." "What do you need?" "Defib ready and another set of hands." Lena had the defibrillator charged in the time it took most people to locate it. She ran the pads, called clear, watched the rhythm on the screen. Dale Pruitt's body arched once and settled. The monitor line did something irregular, and then, with the specific grudging quality of a system that had decided to cooperate, organized itself into a sinus rhythm. Reyes let out a breath. Just one. "Thank you," she said to Lena and no one else. Lena stepped back and let Reyes work. She went to Bay 2, the patient who had first been Aronson's respiratory arrest. A 62-year-old man named Arthur Finch, who had been stable for the last 40 minutes, but whose oxygen saturation she didn't love. She adjusted his flow rate, repositioned his head, checked his airway. He was conscious and miserable and had been asking for water every few minutes, which she'd been redirecting because she didn't know yet whether he was going to need any procedures. "You're still here," Arthur said. He meant it as an observation, but it came out as something closer to relief. "Still here," she said. "How bad is it out there?" She thought about how to answer that. Arthur was 62 and had the face of a man who had been through things and come out on the other side and didn't need protecting from the truth. "It's manageable," she said. "Ask me again in an hour." "You going to give me a real answer in an hour?" "Maybe," she said. "Depends on the hour." He almost smiled. "Fair enough. Fair." She was back in the corridor when the overhead emergency lights shifted. A small change, a slight brightening. The kind that happens when a secondary system finds a power source it wasn't using before. Not full restoration, but something. The monitors in two of the bays stabilized their readings. The ventilation system in the east corridor made a sound like clearing its throat, and resumed. Ray Obradovich appeared beside her with the expression of a man reporting something he couldn't quite believe. "Cora Lennox's husband is here," he said. "West stairwell just cleared, and the OB team is 5 minutes out." "Good." "Fetal heart rate is 122. "Better." She exhaled. "That's better." "Also," Ray said, and he paused in a way that made her look at him directly. "Dr. Holt just called the chief of medicine. He's asking for an emergency review of everything you did tonight. He wants it on record before the shift ends." She had expected this. She had expected it from the moment she called the cath lab without waiting. That didn't make it uncomplicated. "Okay," she said. "Lena." Ray lowered his voice, not because Holt was nearby, though he might have been, but with the specific intimacy of someone saying something they'd been working up to. "Where did you learn that stuff? The way you did the chest assessment on Pruitt, the fetal positioning, the defibrillator. You ran those pads faster than I've ever seen anyone run them." She looked at him. "I've had a lot of practice," she said. Ray waited. She didn't say more, and after a moment he nodded, slowly, the way you nod when you've understood that the door is an opening, but you've at least confirmed there's a door. She walked away. The next 40 minutes were not triumphant. They were grinding and imperfect, and she made 2 decisions she second-guessed immediately afterward. A medication adjustment on Arthur Finch that she walked back 6 minutes later when his response was different from what she'd expected, and a judgment call on Tyler's arm that she later thought she could have done better if she'd had a second pair of hands. She told herself about both of these things clearly, the way she'd been trained to. No softening, no self-protection, just This was wrong. Correct it. Move on. Because self-assessment was the only honest currency, and she'd learned that in a context where getting it wrong had meant something different than a bad outcome report. By 8:15, Dale Pruitt was stable, pending transfer to surgical suite as soon as the elevator came back online. Harlan Quill was in the cath lab with a team working on him. Cora Lennox had her husband beside her and the OB team managing her care, and her baby's heart rate was 131. Tyler was awake again, eating ice chips, and had requested to know if the nurse with the ponytail was coming back. Arthur Finch was breathing on his own. Sandra Kowalski, the head LAC from the MVA, had been managed by the surgical resident and was resting with a properly closed wound and a cervical collar and the particular exhausted calm of someone who had gotten through the worst of it. 6 patients. 6. Lena stood at the nurse's station and let herself feel the weight of the last 2 hours for approximately 12 seconds, because that was what she had. And then she filed it and began writing up her documentation. Every decision, every order, every action, time-stamped and specific and written in the flat clinical language that would either defend her or bury her when Holt's review came through. She was on page 3 when the front entrance of the emergency department opened, not the ambulance bay. The main entrance, the doors that led to the parking lot, which in normal circumstances were for family members and walk-ins, but which tonight had been closed and locked since the lockdown. They opened anyway. The security guard stationed at the desk stood up, hand moving to his radio, and then stopped, because the 2 people who walked through the doors were not family members. They were in uniform. Not hospital security, not Mercer Falls PD. Military. The kind of uniform that came with rank insignia on the shoulder and a very specific posture that had nothing to do with how they were standing and everything to do with what they'd done to become the kind of person who stood that way. Behind them, through the glass doors, in the parking lot, Lena caught a glimpse of vehicles. Not police cruisers. Military vehicles, the kind with hard angles and government plates. The 2 officers scanned the emergency department. The way they scanned it was not the way civilians scanned a room. It was systematic, quadrant by quadrant, the automatic cataloging of a trained observer. They found her immediately. The taller one, a woman with silver oak leaf clusters on her collar that put her at lieutenant colonel, minimum, took 3 steps forward and stopped. She looked at Lena across the entire length of the emergency department, past the nurse's station and the half-lit bays, and Marcus Holt standing frozen with his legal pad, and 6 patients who had no idea what was happening. She looked at Lena with the particular expression of someone who has been looking for something for a long time and has just found it somewhere they didn't expect. "Chief Marsh," she said, her voice carried through the entire department. "We've been looking for you." Part 3. The Secret Soldier. The word landed in the emergency department the way a stone lands in still water. Not loud, but spreading, the ripple moving outward through every person in the room until it reached the walls and had nowhere left to go. Chief Marsh. Not Nurse Marsh. Not the quiet one. Not the woman Holt had been calling nurse with that particular inflection for 2 years. Chief. Lena set down her pen. She did it slowly because the alternative was to grip it until her hand shook, and she was not going to do that. Not here, not in front of these people, and not in front of these 2 officers who had just walked through a locked door in a blacked-out hospital in the middle of a Wyoming storm and said her name like they'd been carrying it around for a long time. She turned. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Vance, the name would come later, with the credentials, with the documentation, was about 45, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been weathered into something harder and cleaner than it probably started as. The man beside her was younger, a major by his insignia, dark-complexioned, and he was already scanning the room in the particular systematic way that told Lena he was doing a threat assessment, even though this was a hospital, and the only threat in the room was administrative. She walked toward them, not fast, not slow. Behind her, she heard Marcus Holt make a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The involuntary audio of a man whose internal model of reality had just encountered something that didn't fit. Lena stopped 3 feet from the lieutenant colonel. "Colonel Vance?" she said quietly. Vance's expression shifted by about 2 millimeters, which on her face was the equivalent of a full emotional display. "You know me." "I know your record. We've never met in person." "No," Vance said. "We haven't. You made that fairly difficult. There was nothing accusatory in it, just factual, the way someone might note that a particular road was hard to navigate. Not a judgment, just a thing that was true. What triggered it? Lena asked. Vance glanced at the major beside her. He reached into his jacket and produced a tablet. Military issue, matte black, the kind that didn't go dark when you needed it, and turned it toward her. On the screen was security camera footage, timestamped from 47 minutes ago. Bay 1. Dale Pruitt in VTAC, Lena running the defibrillator pads, calling clear, the whole sequence captured from the ceiling-mounted camera above the crash cart. She looked at the footage for a moment. She understood immediately. It wasn't the defibrillation itself. Any competent nurse could run a defibrillator. It was the sequence, the specific order of actions, the hand placement, the way she had assessed the rhythm before charging, the verbal cadence of the clear call. A protocol so particular to a specific training program that seeing it on a hospital security camera was like seeing someone write in a language that only 300 people in the country knew. The footage flagged our monitoring system, Vance said. Automated alert. Someone with our specific technical training appearing on a civilian hospital system. She paused. We thought it was a false positive at first. It's not. No, Vance agreed. It's not. Behind Lena, someone moved. She didn't have to turn to know it was Holt. She could tell by the sound, the specific footstep of a man who has decided that whatever is happening, he is in charge of it. Excuse me. His voice came from about 6 feet back, and it had the particular calibration of institutional authority, the tone he used when he needed a room to remember who held the title. This is a restricted medical facility. I'm Dr. Marcus Holt, Emergency Department Director. I'm going to need to see credentials, and I'm going to need to know the nature of this visit before anyone continues any conversation on these premises. Vance looked at him. It was a brief look, the kind you give to something that has appeared in your peripheral vision and does not require sustained attention. The major produced a credential wallet without being asked. Federal identification. A letter on Department of Defense letterhead. A second document with a classification header that Holt couldn't fully read from where he was standing, but that visibly rearranged the expression on his face. The nature of this visit, Vance said to Holt, is a matter of federal jurisdiction. We'll need a private space to speak with your employee. She's not just an employee, she's currently under administrative review for Dr. Holt. Vance turned her full attention to him for the first time, and the effect was immediate. Not because she raised her voice or changed her posture, but because she had the specific quality of someone who had spent years making their presence felt in rooms where people didn't want to listen, and she had gotten very good at it. I need that space, and I need it now. Holt's jaw worked. He looked at Lena, and in his expression was something she hadn't seen from him before. Not anger, not contempt, but the first real uncertainty. A hairline fracture in the certainty he'd been wearing all evening. The family consultation room, Ray Obradovich said from the nurse's station. He'd been listening to the whole thing with the expression of a man watching a wildfire from a safe distance, aware he was safe, not sure for how long. Down the east corridor, second door on the left. It's got power from the auxiliary. Vance nodded once at Ray, which was more acknowledgement than she'd given Holt. The consultation room had 6 chairs, a table, a box of tissues no one had restocked, and a framed landscape painting that had been there so long it had stopped being visible. Lena sat across from Vance and the Major, whose name turned out to be Deshaun Garrett, and who pulled a voice recorder from his jacket and set it on the table with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this before. For the record, Garrett said, Chief Master Sergeant Lena Marsh, United States Air Force Pararescue, service number. I know my service number, Lena said. Garrett stopped, looked at Vance. Vance gave him a small nod, and he clicked the recorder off. Okay, Vance said. Off record then. For a minute? She leaned back slightly. It wasn't relaxation, it was a deliberate adjustment, a woman recalibrating the temperature of a conversation. You've been here 2 years. Yes. Callaway Memorial, Mercer Falls, Wyoming, ER nurse, day shift mostly. Yes. You left a lot behind, Vance said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't an accusation. It was an acknowledgement, and it landed differently because of that. Lena looked at the table for a moment. I needed something quieter. And is it? Quiet? She thought about the last 3 hours, about Dale Pruitt's chest and Cora Lennox's monitor and Tyler's arm and Harlan Quill's EKG and the lights going out and 6 people she had held together in the dark with 2 nursing students and a charge nurse who'd never delivered a baby. Not tonight, she said. Vance's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but in that direction. No, not tonight. She folded her hands on the table. We need to formally reactivate your credentials, not your service. I understand you separated honorably. I understand why. I'm not here to undo that. But your federal medical credentials have been inactive since your discharge, and there are circumstances that make reactivating them beneficial to both parties. What circumstances? Garrett reached into his folder and produced a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the table. She looked at it. She read it twice. The second time, slowly. It was a federal medical oversight form, the kind that got generated when a civilian facility was being examined for systemic violations. It had Callaway Memorial's name on it at the top. It had a case number. It had a date, not tonight's date, a date from 4 months ago. She looked up. This investigation was already open. Yes, Vance said, before tonight. Yes. Lena sat with that for a moment. How long have you known about Callaway Memorial? Long enough, Vance said. The footage tonight accelerated the timeline. We were going to move next month. The alert put us in the car tonight instead. She paused, which may have been fortunate for several people in your emergency department. What are the violations? Garrett took the paper back. That's going to be part of a separate conversation, and it's going to involve the Federal Medical Examiner's Office and the State Health Board. What I can tell you right now is that this facility has been flagged for a pattern of staffing manipulation, suppressed incident reports, and at least 3 deaths in the past 18 months that may warrant reopened review. The room was very quiet. Lena had known something was wrong at Callaway Memorial. She had known it in the way you know things when you're paying attention. The inconsistencies in incident reports, the nurses who left suddenly, the patients whose outcomes didn't match the paperwork, the conversations that stopped when she walked into the break room. She had known it, and she had documented what she could, and she had stayed, partly because she didn't have anywhere else particular to be, and partly because leaving felt like the wrong kind of quiet. 3 deaths, she said. Potentially more, Garrett said. We're still pulling records. She thought about the patients in the bays outside this room, about the 6 people she'd just spent 2 hours keeping alive, about the fact that in a different version of tonight, one where she hadn't been there, or one where she'd been successfully removed for a protocol violation before the storm hit, those 6 people would have been alone with whatever the hospital's normal procedures actually were. Holt, she said. He's involved. That's what the investigation will determine, Vance said carefully. I'm not asking you to indict him. I'm telling you that the staffing configuration tonight was not accidental. He specifically arranged for me to be alone with 6 critical patients during a storm. He was watching to see if I'd fail. She stopped. Or to see if he could document enough violations to fire me before I documented enough violations to expose him. Vance and Garrett exchanged a look, the kind that communicated something without words, a shorthand developed over years of working the same rooms. That's a significant allegation, Garrett said. It's an observation, Lena said. You can call it an allegation when you pull the staffing records from the last 6 months and compare them to the incident reports that were filed versus the ones that weren't. Another silence. Chief Marsh, Vance said, I need you to understand something. From this point forward, anything you observe tonight, every action taken, every order given, every decision made, is going to be examined by us, by the state board, by Holt's attorneys if it comes to that. And it probably will. She leveled her gaze. Are you confident in what you did tonight? Lena thought about the morphine adjustment she'd walked back on Arthur Finch, the positioning call on Cora Lennox that had been right, but that she'd had a 3-second moment of doubt about. The 2 minutes she'd spent on Tyler when she should have gotten to Dale Pruitt slightly sooner. I made mistakes, she said. I'll document them accurately, and I'd make the same overall decisions again because the alternative was worse. Vance nodded. Good, she said. That's the right answer. They went back out. The emergency department had changed while she was in the consultation room. Not the patients. They were where she'd left them, being managed, stable for now. But the staff had shifted. The two nursing students were standing together near the medication cart with the expression of people who had just watched something they hadn't fully processed yet. Ray Obradovich was at the nurse's station with a phone pressed to his ear and the specific posture of a man receiving information that was rearranging his understanding of the evening. Dr. Aronson was in the corridor, talking to the surgical resident in a low, urgent voice, and he looked up when Lena came out with the two officers behind her, and something moved across his face. Not quite recognition, but the edge of it. Marcus Holt was standing at the center of the department. He had his legal pad, but he wasn't writing on it anymore. He was watching Lena cross the floor with the officers, and he had the expression of a man who had built something carefully over a long period of time and was now watching the ground it was built on shift. She went to check her patients first. She went to Dale Pruitt first because that was right, and because she needed to see with her own eyes that he was still there, still stable, still on the right side of the line she'd been holding him to for the last 2 hours. Dr. Reyes was still with him. She'd pulled a stool to the edge of the bay and was making notes on a tablet, the quiet, concentrated work of a surgeon monitoring a patient who needed surgery she couldn't yet get him to. "He's holding," Reyes said without looking up. "Pressure is 88 over 60. Not good, but better than it was." "Did anyone brief you on the circumstances?" "Ray told me." Reyes looked up. Her eyes moved to the officers standing in the corridor, then back to Lena. "Military?" "Air Force." Reyes considered this. "Are you going somewhere?" "No." "Good," Reyes said. It was the most uncomplicated thing anyone had said to her all evening. She checked Cora next. The OB team had fully taken over. There were 3 of them now, the resident and 2 labor and delivery nurses who'd made it down the west stairwell, and the bay had the organized density of a space where multiple competent people were working together, which was different from the one-person controlled chaos of an hour ago. Cora's husband, a heavy-set man named Patrick, who had clearly been crying in the parking lot and was now holding Cora's hand with both of his and not letting go, looked up when Lena appeared. "You're the one," he said. "Ray told me. You're the one who was with her." "For a while," Lena said. "She's got a better team now." "I want to—" He stopped, started again. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough." "Check with me in a few days when she and the baby are home," Lena said. "That'll be enough." Cora behind him caught Lena's eye. She didn't say anything. She just held her gaze for a moment, and in it was a kind of recognition that had nothing to do with medicine. Lena moved on. She was checking Tyler's arm. He was awake again, asking for more ice chips and also whether there was any pizza available, which seemed like a good sign, when she heard it. Holt's voice, from the corridor, elevated, tight, the voice of a man who had decided that the way through was forward. "I want it on record that this facility's operations have been interfered with by unauthorized federal personnel and that any statements made by nursing staff to these officers without legal representation present." "Dr. Holt," Vance's voice, flat and final as a door closing, "constitute a potential violation of—" "Dr. Holt, stop talking." A silence. Then Holt again, quieter, but with the specific quality of a man who has too much invested to stop. "I have documentation of every unauthorized action taken tonight by Nurse Marsh, every order she gave without physician authorization, every protocol she bypassed. I have timestamps. I have witness statements. I have—" "I'm going to stop you there," Garrett said. His voice was calm and clear and carried the particular authority of someone who had spent years operating in rooms where authority was measured in facts rather than titles. "Because you've just described in considerable detail the actions of a medical professional who kept 6 patients alive during a power failure with minimal physician support, and you've described them as violations." Holt said nothing. "We're going to want that documentation," Garrett continued. "All of it, the timestamps, the witness statements, everything you've written on that legal pad tonight." Another silence, different in character from the first. "I want a lawyer," Holt said. "That," Garrett said, "is your right." Lena finished with Tyler. She smoothed the edge of his blanket. An unnecessary gesture, the kind she didn't usually make, but she made it anyway. And she stepped out of the bay. The department was quiet in a way that emergencies sometimes go quiet in their aftermath. Not peaceful, but spent. the specific exhaustion of a space that has been pushed to its limit and has held. The emergency lighting had stabilized at something close to normal. The monitors were running, the patients were breathing. She looked at her documentation. 3 pages of time-stamped decisions sitting on the nurse's station counter. Everything she'd done, every order, every judgment call, every deviation from standard protocol, and the clinical reasoning behind each one. She'd been writing it as a defense. She realized now it was something else. She picked it up. She walked to where Vance was standing near the entrance and held it out. Vance looked at the pages. She took them. She read the first half of the first page, and then she looked up. "This is your own assessment," she said, "including the mistakes." "Yes. You didn't have to include those." "Yes, I did," Lena said. "That's the only way it means anything." Vance looked at her for a moment with an expression Lena couldn't fully categorize. Something adjacent to respect, but not quite that simple. "I'm going to need a full debrief," Vance said. "Medical and operational. Everything you observed at this facility over the past 2 years. Staffing irregularities, incident patterns, anything that struck you as wrong." "I have notes," Lena said. "Personal notes. I started keeping them 8 months ago." Vance's expression sharpened. "Where?" "Encrypted drive. My apartment." "We're going to need those." "I know," Lena paused. "I kept them because I thought someday someone would ask for them. I didn't know if anyone was going to." "Someone is," Vance said. The automatic doors at the ambulance bay opened, and another figure walked in. A woman in a dark jacket with a badge on her belt that caught the emergency lighting and gave back a specific kind of glint. Federal. Not military. A different kind of federal, the kind that came with a different set of questions. Behind her, through the glass doors, the parking lot was considerably more populated than it had been an hour ago. Lena counted 3 vehicles she hadn't seen before. A 4th was pulling in. The woman in the dark jacket crossed the floor with the directional certainty of someone who had been briefed on the layout. She stopped in front of Holt. She showed him her badge. "Dr. Marcus Holt," she said. Her voice was measured and unhurried, the voice of someone who had learned that urgency was a tool you deployed deliberately. "I'm Special Agent Renata Okafor, Federal Medical Oversight Division. I have a warrant for all patient records, administrative records, and internal communications generated by or stored at this facility for the past 36 months. The legal pad fell out of Holt's hand. It hit the tile with a flat, hollow sound that seemed much too loud for what it was. Everyone in the emergency department heard it. Aronson standing in the corridor, Ray at the nurse's station, Priya and the other nursing student, still near the medication cart. Dr. Reyes, who had stepped out of Bay 1 for a moment. Tyler's parents, who had arrived while Lena was in the consultation room and were sitting at the edge of the bay. Arthur Finch, who was sitting up and had a direct line of sight to the whole thing. They all heard the legal pad hit the floor, and nobody moved to pick it up. Holt looked at it. Then he looked at Agent Okafor. Then he looked at Vance. Then, last, he looked at Lena, and his expression in that moment was something she would have trouble describing afterward. Not guilt, not fear exactly, but the specific look of a man who has been moving very fast in one direction and has suddenly found a wall he didn't know was there. "I want to speak to the hospital's legal counsel," he said. His voice had changed, flattened, defensive, the authority gone out of it, just the words left. "You can make that call," Okafor said. "From here." She produced her phone and held it out. He took it. He walked away from the main floor toward the corridor, and as he went, something happened that Lena registered but couldn't account for in the moment. The staff watched him go. Not with satisfaction, not with hostility, just with the specific quality of watching, the way you watch something you've been trying not to see for a long time that has finally become impossible to look away from. Ray Obradovich at the nurse's station met Lena's eyes across the department. He didn't say anything. He just held her gaze for a long moment, and in it was the accumulated weight of 2 years of watching someone do the right thing in a system that punished them for it. She looked away first. She had more documentation to write. She was sitting at the nurse's station, writing, when she heard the sound she'd been half expecting for the past 20 minutes and half hoping she wouldn't hear for another hour. Not an alarm, something lower, more manual. The administrative office door at the end of the east corridor, opening, and then footsteps. Holt's footsteps coming back down the corridor with a faster cadence than he'd left with. She didn't look up. She heard him say, to someone she couldn't see, in a voice stripped of everything that had been in it all evening, "The footage. The security footage from the ER. I need it pulled. Everything from tonight." A pause. Then the voice of the security desk operator, quiet and uncertain. "Dr. Holt, the system is—" "I need it deleted," Holt said. "Now. Before—" The sound of Agent Okafor's footsteps was fast and deliberate and came from the direction of the main entrance. "Dr. Holt," she said, and her voice had changed. The measured unhurry was still there, but underneath it was something harder. "Step away from the security system." A silence that lasted exactly as long as it took for Marcus Holt to understand that the thing he had just done in front of a federal agent was not recoverable. Then another voice, small, unexpected, coming from Bay 4. Tyler. 8 years old, arm in a proper splint, eating ice chips, who had apparently been awake and watching the entire East Corridor from his gurney. "Mom," he said, not quietly enough, "why is the doctor trying to break the TV?" And in the awful electrical silence that followed, Lena heard something she hadn't expected. Dr. Paola Reyes in Bay 1 made a sound that was almost a laugh. It lasted half a second. Then it stopped. But it had been there. And in the security camera above the nurse's station, the one Holt had been watching all evening, the one he had specifically confirmed was running when he said make sure the cameras are recording, the red indicator light blinked once and stayed on. It had not, as it turned out, been the only camera running tonight. In Bay 4, tucked into the corner of Tyler's gurney, wedged between the blanket and the side rail where it had been since his mother packed his comfort items into the ambulance bag, a stuffed brown bear with a small round eye that was not quite an eye. The bear's eye was a lens. Nobody in the room knew that yet except Tyler, who had forgotten it was there the way children forget things they've grown used to, and Sandra Kowalski, who had packed it without thinking because it was the thing Tyler always took with him when he was scared, and a product engineer in Oregon who had designed the unit for parents who wanted to know their kids were safe at the sitters and had never imagined it would record a hospital director trying to destroy federal evidence in an emergency department during a power failure. The camera had been running on its own battery since Tyler arrived. It had recorded everything in the East Corridor from a 40-degree angle, slightly low, slightly wide, the way a child's eye level would see the world, including Marcus Holt standing at the security desk with his hand on the keyboard and his voice saying, "I need it deleted," in the hearing of a federal agent and approximately 9 other people who would later be asked to give statements. Lena didn't know about the bear yet. What she knew was that Agent Okafor had put herself physically between Holt and the security terminal in the time it took most people to process what he'd said, and that Holt had stopped moving, and that the specific quality of the silence in the corridor had changed from the silence of a bad situation to the silence of a situation that had just gotten definitively worse for one person in particular. She kept writing, not because she was indifferent to what was happening across the room, but because her documentation was the thing she could control right now, and she had learned in a different life that when everything around you was in motion, you anchored to the thing you could control and you didn't let go. Aronson appeared at her elbow. He looked at what she was writing. He read 2 lines. He didn't say anything for a moment, and when he did, his voice was careful in the specific way of someone choosing words, with awareness of how they might be used later. "Do you need me to countersign anything?" he said. She looked at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was the attending on record tonight." He paused. "And because I watched you manage 6 critical patients during a power failure with resources I wouldn't have managed one with. And I've been standing here for the last 20 minutes trying to figure out how I didn't know what I was standing next to." It was not, she noted, an apology. It was an acknowledgement. The difference mattered to her. "I'll flag the orders that need countersignature," she said. "Give me 20 minutes. He nodded. He pulled a chair to the other side of the nurse's station and sat down, which was its own kind of statement. A physician sitting at the nurse's station, making himself available, in full view of the federal agents and whatever was unfolding in the East Corridor. Small things. But in a building where small things had been used as weapons for years, small things going the other direction meant something. Ray came to her at 9:47 with the specific expression of someone carrying information they weren't sure how to deliver. Tyler's mom, he said. Sandra, from the MVA. I know who she is. She wants to know. She says Tyler's bear has a camera in it. He stopped. She says it's been recording. Lena set down her pen. She looked across the department at Bay 4, where Tyler was now sitting up with his mother beside him and a cup of ice chips that was almost empty. Sandra Kowalski had her arm around her son and was watching the East Corridor with the expression of a woman who had driven through a red light into an accident and then woken up in the middle of something considerably larger than a car crash. How long has it been running? Lena asked. She says it starts when the sound level goes above a certain threshold. Ray paused. So it probably caught everything from when the ambulances came in. She found Agent Okafor. Okafor was in the corridor speaking quietly into her phone, and she looked up when Lena approached with the specific attentiveness of someone who had learned to take interruptions seriously. One of the patients in Bay 4, Lena said, keeping her voice low. 8-year-old boy. He has a camera device, stuffed animal, parent monitoring unit. It's been recording since he arrived. It would have caught the East Corridor. Okafor was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Including the security terminal, she said. The angle's not perfect, but yes. Okafor looked at her phone. She looked at the East Corridor, where Holt was now sitting in a chair with his elbows on his knees and the posture of a man who had run out of forward motion. Then she looked at Lena. I need to speak to the mother, she said. Bay 4, Lena said. Her name is Sandra. She walked Okafor to the bay, and then she stepped back because it wasn't her conversation, and Sandra Kowalski deserved to be spoken to directly without a third party in the room. She went back to her documentation. She heard, from across the department, Holt say something to the junior federal agent who had positioned himself near the East Corridor. She couldn't hear the words, just the cadence, which had the quality of a man making arguments that he could hear, even as he made them, weren't landing. The junior agent responded in monosyllables. Holt's cadence changed, went flatter, and then went quiet. She had written 3 more pages when Major Garrett appeared at the nurse's station with a tablet and a request. The notes you mentioned, he said, from the past 8 months. Can you walk me through what you observed? Broadly tonight. We'll get the encrypted drive tomorrow with the full detail. She told him. She told him about the staffing configurations she'd noticed starting about 14 months ago, the way certain shifts were built so that the nurses with the longest tenure and the most incident report history were consistently scheduled together, creating a built-in pressure system where filing a complaint meant filing it against people you worked beside every day. She told him about the 2 nurses who had left in the span of 6 weeks last spring, both of them quiet about the reason. Both of them the type who asked questions in staff meetings and kept personal notes in their lockers. She told him about the patient in Bay 3, 11 months ago. A 61-year-old woman named Margaret Ohlendorf, sepsis, presented with a fever of 104 and altered mental status, who had waited 4 hours for a physician assessment that the intake record showed as happening within 40 minutes of arrival. She had not been able to prove the intake record was falsified. She had documented the discrepancy and put it on the encrypted drive. She had not filed a formal complaint because she didn't have enough, and because she had seen what happened to the people who filed without enough. Garrett was writing fast. He stopped at Margaret Ohlendorf. She died? He asked. 3 days later. The death was attributed to septic shock, advanced presentation. Lena paused. Which it may well have been. Sepsis moves fast, but the delay. If the intake record is wrong, and I believe it is, that delay was correctable. And it wasn't corrected. Garrett underlined something. There were others, she said. I'll give you the drive in the morning. Everything I have is on it. You prepared this, he said. It wasn't an accusation. He was noting it the way you note something that changes the shape of what you're looking at. I prepared it because I didn't know who was going to ask for it or when, she said. But I knew someone would eventually have to. He looked at her across the table for a moment. You could have gone to the state board. I could have, she said. And if the state board had a relationship with this hospital's administration, which in a town this size is not an unreasonable concern, I would have lost my job and the records would have been harder to access. So you waited. I documented, she said. Waiting implies passive. I wasn't passive. He looked at his notes, then back at her. "No," he said. "You clearly weren't." The power came fully back at 10:14, not the gradual apologetic restoration of a system limping back online. A complete return, all the overheads, all the monitors, the full mechanical breathing of a functioning hospital resuming in one coordinated exhale. The emergency bays went from red-tinged dimness to full fluorescent in about 2 seconds, and for a moment everybody in the department blinked like people coming out of a long room into daylight. Dale Pruitt was going to surgery. The elevator was running, a surgical team had been assembled from the staff that had been trapped on 4 and 5. And Dr. Reyes was scrubbing in his primary with the hospital's own trauma surgeon, who had descended with the particular urgency of a man who had been pacing a stairwell landing for 2 hours waiting for power. She shook Reyes's hand once, briskly, 2 surgeons establishing working parameters in the compressed language of people with something to do. She looked at Lena on her way past. "He's going to make it," she said. Not a prediction, a statement of intent. "I know," Lena said. Reyes went. Lena checked Harlan Quill. The cath lab had called down 20 minutes ago. Procedure completed, stent placed, blood flow restored, patient stable and resting. Beverly Quill had been allowed up. Lena had gotten the update from the cath lab nurse and relayed it to Beverly herself, because Beverly had been in the corridor for 3 hours, and she deserved to hear it from a person and not a phone extension. Beverly had grabbed both of Lena's hands when she heard. She didn't say anything, she just held on for a moment and then let go, and then walked very quickly toward the elevator, which was finally running. Lena watched her go. She was tired in a way that was below the surface. Not the tired that makes your eyes heavy, but the tired that lives in the specific places where you've been holding tension without knowing it. Shoulders and the back of the jaw and the particular muscles around your eyes that clench when you're maintaining an expression you need other people to see. She let herself feel it for about 30 seconds. Then she put it back in the drawer. The thing about the drawer was that it worked, right up until it didn't, and then you dealt with that separately, somewhere private. And that was a different kind of work for a different kind of time. Ray was beside her with coffee. Not the good kind, the burned pot kind that had been sitting in the break room carafe for probably 4 hours. But it was hot, and it was something to hold. "Sandra Kowalski gave them the bear," he said. "I know." Holt's lawyer showed up, hospital's in-house counsel. Young guy, looked like he'd been asleep when they called him. Ray paused. He spoke to Holt for about 5 minutes in the East Corridor, and then he came back out and told Agent Okafor that Dr. Holt would be cooperating fully. Lena drank the coffee. It was bad. She finished it anyway. "What does that mean, cooperating fully?" she asked. "I don't know, Ray said. "But Holt came back to the main floor about 10 minutes ago, and he doesn't look the same as he did." She looked across the department. Holt was sitting in the family waiting area near the main entrance, not the East Corridor, not the administrative wing, just the waiting area, the same vinyl chairs that families used when they were waiting for news about the people they loved. He was sitting in one of those chairs with his lawyer beside him and the legal pad on his knee, but nothing written on it, and he was looking at his own hands. She had seen that look before, in different places on different people. The look of someone who had been running on forward momentum and had finally stopped, and in stopping had discovered that the momentum was the only thing that had been keeping the whole structure up. She didn't feel the satisfaction she thought she might feel. What she felt was something more complicated and less useful, which was a specific kind of exhaustion at the fact that it had taken this long and this much for anyone to look. Colonel Vance found her near Bay 2. Arthur Finch had finally been moved to a monitoring room upstairs, breathing stable, no longer needing the ER. And the bay was empty for the first time all night. Vance stepped into the empty space and Lena followed her without being asked, because empty spaces in emergency departments were valuable and brief and you used them when you got them. "The bear footage," Vance said. "Okafor's team is processing it. It caught the full exchange at the security terminal." "I figured." "It also caught approximately 90 minutes of the emergency department before that." Vance paused. "Including Dr. Holt's positioning during the crisis. His commentary. His phone calls." Lena said nothing. "There's a section," Vance continued, "where he's on the phone with someone at the hospital administration level, while Dale Pruitt is actively in VTAC 20 feet away. He's describing your actions as liability exposure while a trauma surgeon is running a resuscitation. Who is he calling? We're pulling the phone records. Vance's voice was level. But based on the conversation content, it sounds like someone in the administrative chain who was aware of the general situation and was being kept informed. This was new information and it rearranged things. It meant Holt hadn't been acting alone tonight. It meant the staffing configuration, the storm, the positioning of Lena alone with 6 patients. It hadn't been the impulsive decision of one arrogant department director. It had been coordinated. Someone upstairs had been following along. The hospital board, Lena said. Possibly. Possibly one member of it. Possibly more. Vance watched her. Does that surprise you? She thought about the staffing patterns over the past 14 months. The nurses who had left. Margaret Ohlendorf's intake record. The way certain conversations stopped when certain people walked into rooms. The way the administrative wing operated with the specific opacity of a system that had learned to make things disappear before they became visible. No, she said. It doesn't surprise me. It should make you angry. It does, Lena said. I'm just not going to do that here. Vance looked at her with the expression she'd been giving her since the consultation room. Something that had moved past professional assessment into something slightly more personal. You know what you remind me of, she said, and then she stopped herself. What? The people I've had the hardest time convincing to take credit for what they did, Vance said. The ones who are most certain that the work is the point and not the recognition. She paused. It's an admirable quality, and it's also why people like Holt can operate for as long as they do. Because the people who could expose them are too busy doing the actual job. Lena didn't have an answer to that. She wasn't sure Vance expected one. From the main floor, she heard Agent Okafor's voice. Not the words, just the cadence. The specific register of someone delivering formal information to a person who needs to hear it clearly and without ambiguity. She heard Holt's lawyer respond. She heard a silence and then the sound of chairs moving. She and Vance stepped back out to the main floor. Holt was standing. He had stood up from the vinyl chair with the stiffness of a man whose body was registering what his mind had been carrying for the past hour, and he was looking at Agent Okafor with the expression of someone who has fully arrived at the thing they were moving toward and found it exactly as bad as they'd feared. Okafor was holding a document. Not a phone, not a tablet, a physical document printed with official headers that were visible even from across the room. Dr. Marcus Holt, she said, and her voice carried through the emergency department with the flat precision of someone reading from a prepared text, because the words mattered, and the order mattered, and she was not going to let any of it be misremembered later. This is a federal detainment notice issued under the Federal Medical Oversight Act, Sections 12 and 17, pending criminal investigation into the falsification of medical records, criminal negligence, and obstruction of a federal investigation. The last part was new, the obstruction charge. That was the security terminal. That was tonight. The room was completely still. Every person who was ambulatory and conscious in Callaway Memorial's emergency department at 10:43 on that Wednesday night was looking at Marcus Holt. The nursing students, Ray Obradovich, who had his hand over his mouth and was breathing through his nose. Dr. Aronson, standing at the entrance to the east corridor with his arms at his sides. Dr. Reyes, who had not yet gone to scrub in and was watching from the bay one entrance. The junior federal agent near the security desk. A security guard who hadn't moved from his position for 40 minutes. Tyler Kowalski, in Bay 4, who understood that something important was happening even if he didn't have all the words for it. Holt looked at his lawyer. His lawyer gave him a small, specific nod that communicated, "This is the moment when you stop talking." Holt looked at Okafor. He looked at the document. He looked at the room, the full room, the whole department, every face, with the particular quality of a man who is seeing clearly for the first time in a long time. And what he's seeing is the distance between who he thought he was and what the room is showing him. He looked last at Lena. She met his gaze. She didn't have anything to say to him, and she was not going to perform anything for his benefit, so she simply looked back, steady, quiet, present, the same way she'd been looking at everything all night. He looked away first. "I'll come voluntarily," he said to Okafor. His voice was all the way down now, flat and used up. "Yes," Okafor said. "You will." He walked out of the emergency department he had run for 11 years with his lawyer at his elbow, and 2 federal agents behind him, and the full fluorescent lights of a restored power grid illuminating every step. The automatic doors opened. The night air came in, cold, post-storm, carrying the specific clean smell of rain that has stopped. And then the doors closed behind him, and he was gone. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Ray Obradovich made a sound that was somewhere between a breath and a word, and he sat down heavily at the nurse's station, and he put his face in his hands for about 10 seconds. Not crying, just that. The release of something that had been held for too long. Priya, the nursing student, looked at Lena across the department with an expression of total overwhelm and said simply, "What just happened?" "He's being investigated," Lena said. "The hospital is being investigated. It's going to be a long process, and it's going to involve a lot of people asking a lot of questions." She paused. "But tonight, all 6 patients are accounted for, and that's what tonight was about." Priya stared at her. That's all you're going to say?" "That's what I've got right now," Lena said. She went back to her documentation. She was on the last page, the final entries, the post-stabilization checks, the transfer notes for Dale Pruitt going to surgery. When Major Garrett came back to the nurse's station with his tablet and his notes and a different expression than he'd had an hour ago. Tighter. Something had happened. "The phone records came back," he said. She looked up. "Fast," she said. "We had a standing request on this facility's administrative lines. It was part of the original investigation." He looked at his tablet. "The call Holt made during the crisis, the number he called." He stopped. "It's the hospital's chief operating officer, a man named Warren Stills." She knew the name. Everyone in the building knew the name. Warren Stills was the administrative architecture behind Marcus Holt, the man who had hired him 11 years ago and defended him in 2 previous staff complaints, and controlled the budget that controlled the staffing that controlled everything downstream. "He was monitoring tonight," Garrett said. "In real time. The call log shows 11 minutes of conversation while your ER was in crisis." "Was he aware of the staffing configuration?" "The call content suggests yes." Garrett paused. "It also suggests he knew about you specifically, your background. He told Holt..." He checked his tablet, reading carefully. "He told Holt that you were a loose end that needed to be resolved before the review." The words settled over her like cold water. Not surprising. But hearing it stated plainly, with a timestamp and a phone log, was different from knowing it in the abstract. "They knew," she said. "Not about the military record, but they knew I'd been documenting." "It appears that way." Garrett met her eyes. "Someone in the administrative chain knew you'd been keeping notes. We think it may have been a staff member who saw you accessing the encrypted drive. We're still tracing it." She sat with this. The engineered crisis, the 6 patients, the storm, the power failure that was... She looked at Garrett. "Was the power failure..." "We don't know yet," he said immediately. "The outage was attributed to storm damage to the east substation. It may have been exactly that. We're looking at whether there was any interference with the backup generator, but right now that's an open question." Open question. Which meant it might be a coincidence that the power failed on the one night the ER was intentionally understaffed. Or it might not. She looked at the 6 empty bays. Full an hour ago, slowly clearing now, the specific ebb of an emergency passing into its aftermath. 6 people. All of them alive. She thought about Margaret Ohlendorf, who hadn't been. She thought about the 2 nurses who had left in the spring and were somewhere else now, presumably, doing work that deserved better than what they'd been handed here. She thought about the patients she hadn't known about, the ones in the files Okafor was pulling, the ones whose deaths had been attributed correctly or incorrectly, the ones who might have had different outcomes if someone had looked sooner. She was still sitting with that when Vance appeared one more time, coat on now, the posture of someone getting ready to move. "We're setting up a formal command post at the field office in Casper," Vance said. Garrett will stay here tonight with Okafor's team. I need to ask you something before I go. Go ahead. Stills, Vance said. Warren Stills, where is he right now? Lena frowned. His office, administrative wing, third floor, usually works late on... She stopped, because she had just remembered something. A small thing. The kind of thing you notice and file and don't retrieve until you need it. Warren Stills' car. His specific car. A dark blue sedan, hospital parking space number 4, reserved, visible from the ambulance bay entrance. She had walked past it twice tonight. Once when the second ambulance came in, and once when she stepped outside for 60 seconds during the brief window between patients 5 and 6 to clear her head in the cold air. It had been there both times. She looked at Garrett. His car is in the lot, she said. Garrett was already moving toward the radio. He's been in the building, she said, this whole time. And from the administrative wing, from somewhere above them, through the ceiling, through the restored electrical system, through the specific silence that follows a storm, she heard something that did not belong. An elevator, moving, going down. Garrett had his radio up before the elevator sound fully registered, and the 2 agents near the east corridor were moving within 4 seconds of his call. Not running, but the fast, purposeful walk of people who have been trained that running creates panic, and panic creates mistakes. Lena stayed where she was, not because she wasn't thinking about Warren Stills, but because she had 6 patients in various stages of transfer and treatment, and her job was not to chase administrative officers through hospital corridors. Her job was the same thing it had been all night. She picked up her pen. She heard from somewhere near the main entrance voices, the clipped exchange of agents coordinating, a response from someone she couldn't see, and then a longer silence, and then the elevator doors opening on the ground floor with the specific mechanical exhale of a system that had been held closed and was now releasing. Ray Obradovich appeared at the edge of the nurse's station. He had the expression of a man watching something he'd already decided not to look away from. Stills is in the lobby, he said quietly. She looked up. Through the glass partition that separated the ER from the main hospital entrance, she could see the lobby, and she could see Warren Stills. He was 61 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the specific physical authority of a man who had spent 3 decades in administrative roles and had learned that how you occupied space was half of how you held power. He was wearing a coat. He had a briefcase. He had, she noted, car keys in his hand. He had been in the building all night, and he had been planning to leave, and he had waited until what he calculated was the right moment, after Holt's removal, after the initial federal activity, in the gap between the first wave of agents and whatever came next. It was, she had to admit, not a stupid calculation. It was also wrong by about 4 minutes. Agent Okafor stepped into the lobby from the side corridor with the specific timing of someone who had been positioned there since the moment Garrett called it in. Behind Stills, the main entrance doors, which required a badge to open after hours, stayed closed. The junior agent at the security desk had taken the override off the door panel. Stills stopped. He looked at Okafor. He looked at the doors. He looked at the briefcase in his hand with a brief, involuntary glance that told Lena everything she needed to know about what was in it. "Mr. Stills," Okafor said through the glass, her voice muffled but audible. "I'm going to need you to set the briefcase down." He set it down. He set it down slowly, and in the movement was the full weight of a man who has been holding something up for a very long time and has finally run out of the strength to keep holding it. He straightened. He put his hands at his sides. He looked at the briefcase on the lobby floor as if it had betrayed him, which in a way it had. Carrying it had told Okafor everything she needed to know about what he'd been planning. The federal agent near the entrance produced a second detainment notice. Lena looked away. She went back to her documentation. She finished it at 11:22. 14 pages, handwritten first, and then transferred to the hospital's electronic system, time-stamped and locked with her login credentials. Every decision, every order, every deviation and the reasoning behind it, every mistake she had made and what she had done to correct it. The whole night, rendered in the flat clinical language that stripped the drama out of it and left only the facts, which were more damning and more important than any dramatic version would have been. She signed it, she locked it, She printed one copy and gave it to Garrett, who was still in the building, and she kept one copy in her locker because she had learned that keeping copies was not paranoia, but practice. Then she sat at the empty nurses' station in the full fluorescent light of a hospital that was slowly returning to something resembling normal, and she allowed herself 3 minutes of doing absolutely nothing. This was harder than it sounded. Her hands wanted to be moving. Her mind kept generating the next task. Check on Tyler, follow up with the cath lab, find out if Dale Pruitt was out of surgery yet. She let the impulse rise, and she didn't act on it, because 3 minutes was what she had promised herself, and 3 minutes was what she was going to take. Ray brought her more coffee. Better this time. Someone had made a fresh pot. He set it down without saying anything, which was the most considerate thing anyone had done for her all night. She drank it. She thought about Margaret Ohlendorf. She thought about a 61-year-old woman who had come to this emergency department with a fever and confusion and had waited 4 hours in a bay while a falsified record said she'd been seen in 40 minutes. And she thought about what Margaret Ohlendorf's family had been told and what they had believed, and how long it was going to take the reopened review to give them something closer to the truth. The truth was not going to fix what had happened to Margaret Ohlendorf. It wasn't going to fix any of the people in those files. It was going to do a different thing, which was make it harder for the same thing to happen to the next person, which was a smaller and more complicated kind of justice, but the only kind that was actually available. She had made her peace with that distinction a long time ago, in a different context, under different circumstances. It didn't make it easy. It made it manageable. Her 3 minutes ended. She went to check on Tyler. He was asleep again, genuinely asleep this time. The deep and total unconsciousness of a child who has used up every resource and surrendered completely to rest. His arm was properly splinted, and his color was good, and his breathing was even. Sandra was asleep in the chair beside him, her head tipped back at an angle that was going to hurt her neck in the morning and that she clearly didn't care about. Lena stood at the edge of the bay for a moment. She didn't go in. There was nothing to adjust, nothing to check that she couldn't see from here. She just looked. 8 years old, she thought. And he had sat in that gurney for 2 hours, watching everything happening around him without crying, and his bear had recorded all of it. And tomorrow or the next day, someone was going to have to explain to him in age-appropriate terms that the footage from his stuffed animal had helped take down a corrupt hospital director. And Lena suspected Tyler was going to think this was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to him. She hoped he was right. She hoped it stayed the most interesting thing. She turned and walked back to the main floor. Dale Pruitt came out of surgery at 1:17 in the morning. Dr. Reyes called the ER directly. Not through the standard post-operative notification channel, but on the direct line, and Ray picked up and then looked at Lena with an expression she couldn't fully read until he said, "He's out. Stable. She said to tell you the abdomen was worse than the imaging suggested and he would not have made it to morning." She absorbed this. "Tell her thank you," Lena said. "She also said," Ray continued, reading off the notepad he'd scribbled on, and I'm quoting directly here, "Tell Nurse Marsh she called it correctly on the timeline and she should know that." Lena looked at the notepad. She looked at the quote. She thought about the specific deliberateness of Reyes choosing to say that. A trauma surgeon who owed her nothing and was under no obligation to credit anyone in the ER for a patient who had made it to the OR alive. Small things. "Write it in the log," she said. "Post-operative notification, 1:17 a.m., patient stable." Ray wrote it. Then he looked up. "You're going to have to go home eventually." "I know." "It's been 6 hours." "I know that too." "Lena." He put the pen down. "Go home. I've got the floor." She looked at the department. The bays were mostly quiet. 2 patients still being monitored, both stable. Cora Lennox had been moved to labor and delivery 2 hours ago. The OB team had managed to hold the delivery until she was in a proper room, and the last word was that the baby was coming soon and everything was pointing in the right direction. Harlan Quill was in cardiac monitoring upstairs. Arthur Finch was in a step-down room on 3. Tyler and Sandra were both asleep in Bay 4, and someone from admissions had apparently decided to just let them be rather than transfer them to a room in the middle of the night, which was one of the more human decisions this building had made all evening. She picked up her jacket from the hook near the medication cabinet. She put it on. She looked at the department one more time. It looked like itself. Fluorescent and tired and still faintly smelling of antiseptic and rain, the institutional beige of every surface exactly as unremarkable as it had been at 6:47 when the first ambulance came in. The same room, different stakes. She walked out. The parking lot was cold and clear, the storm having scrubbed the air down to something sharp and clean. The clouds had broken, and the mountains were back, dark shapes against a sky that was starting its long early transition from black to the dark blue that came before anything else. She stood next to her car for a moment and breathed it in. Her hands were finally still. She noticed this because they had not been still, not completely, for 6 hours. Always moving, always doing the next thing, and now they were just hands hanging at the end of her arms, doing nothing. She let them. She drove home. She slept. The formal review began 5 days later. It was not, as these things went, a quick or comfortable process. The Federal Medical Oversight Division's investigation ran parallel to a state health board review and a separate criminal inquiry, and the three processes overlapped and contradicted each other at intervals, and required Lena to give the same information to different people in different rooms on 3 separate occasions, each time with slightly different questions that were trying to establish slightly different things. She gave her encrypted drive to Garrett on the morning after the storm. She sat across from investigators in a field office in Casper and walked through 14 months of documented observations, case by case, discrepancy by discrepancy, the whole quiet archive of a person who had decided that writing things down was the only power she had and had used it accordingly. She was not a perfect witness. She said twice, "I'm not certain about that." Once about a specific date, and once about the identity of a staff member she'd seen entering the administrative wing late at night. And both times the investigators noted it and moved on. And she understood that saying "I'm not certain" was not weakness, but accuracy. And accuracy was the only thing that was going to hold. Her documentation held. All 14 pages of that night. All 14 months of prior notes. The investigators cross-referenced her records against the official incident logs and found, in 7 separate cases, discrepancies that ranged from minor to significant to, in 2 cases, material. Margaret Ohlendorf's file was one of the 2. She was told about this by Agent Okafor, on the phone, 3 weeks after the storm. Not the details, those were pending, but the confirmation that the Ohlendorf case had been flagged for full reinvestigation and that the family had been contacted. She sat with her phone after the call ended and thought about what it meant that a 61-year-old woman's death was going to get a second look, because a nurse had been keeping notes on an encrypted drive for over a year and had held on to them long enough for someone to finally ask. It meant something. Not enough. Something. The charges against Marcus Holt were filed 6 weeks after the storm. Criminal negligence, falsification of medical records, obstruction of a federal investigation. The obstruction charge was the one that was going to stick the hardest. The security terminal moment had been witnessed by a federal agent, recorded on Tyler Kowalski's Bear, and corroborated by the testimony of 3 nursing staff members who had been in the East Corridor when it happened. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The trial date was set for 14 months out. Lena was listed as a material witness, which meant she was going to have to do this all over again in a courtroom, which was not something she was looking forward to, but also not something she was afraid of. Warren Stills was charged separately, 2 weeks after Holt, on counts of conspiracy, falsification of records, and criminal negligence. His briefcase had contained, among other things, a portable hard drive with copies of administrative communications spanning 4 years. Communications that his attorney later argued he had been carrying as personal insurance, which was possibly the least effective legal defense Lena had ever heard described secondhand, and she had heard some things. The hospital board convened an emergency session the week after the storm. 3 of its 7 members resigned. The remaining 4 voted to place the facility under independent administrative oversight pending the completion of the federal investigation, which meant that for the foreseeable future, the decisions at Callaway Memorial were going to be made by people who had no prior relationship with the decisions that had already been made there. It was not a perfect solution. The board had known something was wrong. Not all of them maybe, and not all of it, but enough of them, enough of it, that the collective ignorance they claimed was a harder sell than they seemed to think. The investigation would determine what they knew and when. The outcome of that would determine what happened to them. She didn't spend time thinking about whether it would be enough. Enough was a moving target, and she had learned not to chase it. What she thought about in the weeks that followed was Ray Obradovich. He had filed a formal incident report the morning after the storm. Not about Lena, about the staffing configuration. His own report, his own language, documenting what he had observed over the past year in terms of how shifts were constructed and who bore the weight of them. It was 3 pages. He had written it at his kitchen table at 3 in the morning after the shift ended, and he had filed it before he slept. She found out about this because he told her directly 2 days later in the break room over the kind of coffee that was slightly less bad than the burned pot variety. "I should have done it sooner," he said. "Yes," she said, because he should have, and because the kindest thing she could do was not pretend otherwise. He nodded. He looked at his cup. "I was scared." "I know." "That's not an excuse." "No," she said, "but it's a reason. There's a difference." He looked at her for a moment. "How did you not get scared?" She thought about this honestly. "I did get scared," she said. "I got scared the first time I noticed something wrong and didn't know if anyone was ever going to look. I kept getting scared every time I added something to that drive and didn't know if it mattered." She paused. "Being scared wasn't the part that was optional. What I did with it was." Ray was quiet for a long moment. "Where did you learn that?" "Somewhere loud," she said. He didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded again, the slow, particular nod of someone who understands that some doors are closed and the respect is in not pushing. They finished their coffee. The formal clearance came 8 weeks after the storm. It was not a ceremony. It was a letter. State Medical Board letterhead, 2 pages, clinical language, the specific bureaucratic prose of an institution confirming what had already been established by evidence. It stated that the independent review of Lena Marsh's actions on the night of the storm had found no violations of the nursing scope of practice given the documented circumstances, that all clinical decisions had been consistent with emergency protocols as modified by the specific constraints of that evening, and that the prior administrative complaint filed by Dr. Marcus Holt had been reviewed, found to be without factual basis, and permanently expunged from her record. Permanently expunged. She read that phrase twice, not because she needed to read it twice to understand it, but because she wanted to be in the moment of reading it for slightly longer than it took to process the information. Ray framed a copy without telling her and put it on the break room wall. She took it down the day she found it, and she told him it was unprofessional to post personal documents in the break room, and he said he would think about that, and the next morning it was back up. She left it. The military credential reactivation was a different process entirely, slower, more layered, conducted through channels she hadn't used in 2 years, and had to relearn the navigation of. Colonel Vance managed it from her end with the specific efficiency of someone who had done this before and knew exactly which parts of the process were mandatory and which parts were institutional friction that could be reduced by the right phone call. It didn't reinstate her service. That was not what Vance was offering and not what Lena wanted. What it did was formalize something that had been informally true, that her medical credentials, her training, her qualifications existed and were real and could be referenced and recognized in contexts that required it. She was asked, as part of that process, to provide a statement about the events of the storm night, not a clinical account. She'd given 4 of those already to 4 different agencies. A personal account. What had happened from her perspective in terms of her background, her actions, and her assessment of the situation. She wrote 7 drafts. The 8th one she kept. It was 4 pages. It described the night plainly, not heroically, not modestly, just plainly, because plain was the only register that felt honest. It described 6 patients and what each of them had needed and what she had done. It described the resource constraints. It described the 2 mistakes she'd made and what she'd done to correct them. It described the moment the lights went out. It did not describe how she felt about any of it, because how she felt about it was private and complicated and still being sorted, and the statement was not the place for that. What it did include at the end, and she almost cut this 3 times before deciding to leave it, was one paragraph about Margaret Ohlendorf. Not about her case, about the fact of her. That she had been a 61-year-old woman who had come to a hospital when she was sick and had deserved care and had not received it, and that whatever came of the investigation, whatever the legal outcomes were, that fact was the center of the whole thing, and it needed to be said clearly before all the institutional language buried it. She sent the statement. She didn't know who read it or how it was used. She knew she'd written it, which was the part she could control. 11 weeks after the storm, on a Tuesday morning in November, Lena Marsh walked into Callaway Memorial Hospital's emergency department and clocked in for her shift. This was not, on its face, a dramatic event. She had done it hundreds of times. The badge reader beeped. The morning nurses handed off to the day shift with the specific tired efficiency of people at the end of a long night. The medication cabinet required her credentials. The monitors needed checking. What was different was what was on the whiteboard near the nurses' station. Someone, she suspected Ray, though he denied it with insufficient conviction, had written the staff assignments for the morning shift. Her name was at the top of the board, which was not unusual. Below it, in the same marker, was a single word that was not a patient assignment or a task or a protocol notation. It said, Chief, not Nurse Marsh, not Lena, not the diminished, inflected version of a title that Holt had used to flatten her. Just Chief. She looked at it for a moment. She looked at Ray, who was conspicuously busy doing something at the medication cart with his back turned. She looked at Priya, who was now a full-time ER nurse and had apparently negotiated her first staff position at Callaway Memorial in the weeks following the storm, and who was looking at Lena with the expression of someone who knows something has happened and is waiting to see what the other person does with it. She picked up the marker. She crossed out the word chief. She wrote Marsh instead. And then she wrote the patient assignments for the shift, and she started work, because that was what the morning required, and that was what she did, and the title had never been the point. But she put the marker down more slowly than usual, and for a moment, standing at the whiteboard in the full morning light with 6 patient assignments written out and the department coming awake around her, she let the weight of the previous 11 weeks settle down into something she could carry instead of something she was carrying against her will. She had been dismissed. She had been engineered into a situation designed to break her or expose her or both. She had held 6 people alive in the dark with her hands and her training and the specific stubbornness of someone who has seen the alternative and refuses it. She had not done it to prove something. She had done it because they were people and they were dying and she was there. The proving was what happened afterward, in the documents and the testimony and the 14 months of notes on an encrypted drive. The doing had been simpler than that. She thought about the people who had left before her, the nurses who had walked out quietly in the spring, carrying their knowledge and their documented doubts and their exhaustion, going somewhere they hoped was better. She thought about what it cost to be the person who stayed and what it cost to be the person who left, and how both of those costs were real and neither of them was a moral failure, just a choice made under pressure with the information available at the time. She had stayed because leaving felt wrong. That was the honest version. Not because she had a plan or a strategy or a certainty that someone would eventually look. She had stayed because the patients were real and the work was real, and abandoning both felt like a different kind of loss than the one she was already managing. It had turned out to matter. She had not known it was going to. That was the part nobody told you, going in. That you did the right thing without a guarantee, and the guarantee didn't come until later, and sometimes it didn't come at all. And you did it anyway because the alternative wasn't something you could live with. She had learned that in other rooms, under other lights. She was still learning it here. The first patient of the morning came in at 7:44, 43 years old, chest pain, diaphoretic, the specific gray pallor of someone whose body had been arguing with itself all night and had finally lost. Lena was at his side before the gurney stopped moving. She checked his pupils, 2 fingers to his neck. She scanned the paramedic's notes with the fast reading of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for and where to find it. "What's his pressure?" she asked. 90/60, the paramedic said. "Okay." She was already moving. "Let's get him a room." The work continued. It always did. And in a break room down the east corridor, on a wall beside the coffee maker that was finally making decent coffee, A framed clearance letter from the state medical board caught the morning light coming through the window and held it there, quiet and unremarkable, the way important things often look from the outside. Like nothing special, like just a piece of paper, like something you might not even notice unless you knew what it had taken to earn it. Outside, the mountains were still there. The storm had been gone for 11 weeks. The sky was clear and very blue and entirely indifferent to what had happened beneath it, the way skies always are. And underneath it, in a fluorescent-lit emergency department in Mercer Falls, Wyoming, a woman who had once been called nothing more than Nurse Marsh moved through the morning with steady hands and quiet purpose, doing what she had always done, being seen now in the way she had always deserved to be. Not because anyone had finally recognized her worth, but because she had never stopped working whether they did or not. That was the thing about quiet strength. It didn't need an audience. It just needed to be real. And hers had always been.